Welcome to the first episode of the mighty Eunuchs, or transgenders, in the history of mankind. As far as historians remember, I went down like a footnote, a eunuch in the palace, a whisper in the hallowed halls of Persepolis for centuries. They're fools. They speak of Alexander the Great conquering Persia, but also forget about the man who rotted the empire from within, long before Alexander's armies arrived. I am Bagoas. I murdered a king, crowned his son, and then killed him too. I used poison like other men used a sword, and with it I brought the largest dynasty on the face of the earth down. They don't tell it like this in the books of history. The truth is that is the narrative as it is experienced. This is my story, and now my story isn't one of life, but two. This is to picture it as a single thread of aspiration stitched through two men who actually shared my name. For a name, an essence, isn't so easily swiped out of the books of fate. It was meant to be whispered into the ears of kings, toppled thrones, loved conquerors. My first life was a torrent of vengeance, my second a lesson in devotion. Each, in its special way, was an end to the Achaemenid Empire. This starts with blood and shadow, with a boy who was unmade and could be made as a weapon. This is the story of Bagoas the Elder. I wasn't born a eunuch. That is the first and most important truth. I was born with a fire in my belly and strength in my legs. But in the sweltering, capricious Persian Empire, a nice, looking boy from a family with no ties is a shambling piece of clay for meaner hands to shape. The knife that turned me into a eunuch was not merely a tool of castration. It was meant to make a boy into a safe, reposeful prisoner of fear, who would never or cannot have a dynasty of his own, and a king with no dreams. I am Tsar, teaching the common man about the history of the most powerful eunuchs or transgenders. They took my right to have a family away from me, so instead I chose to father the fall of an empire. They robbed me of my manhood, so I made myself more than a man. I was a force of nature, the little tree of the Achaemenid dynasty, slowly being choked with silence. My new life arose within the perfumed cage of the royal household, as a eunuch in the court of the King of Kings, Artaxerxes III, being invisible and all across at once. We were silent attendants in throne rooms, our trusted guards the harem. They heard everything. In their own arrogance, the nobles began speaking freely toward us, thinking that we were nothing more than harmless pawns to be used as furniture. They saw our smooth cheeks and soft voices and saw weakness. They had never witnessed the brains behind the mask, logging every insult, every conspiracy, every secret weakness. The court was a labyrinth of betrayal. In the very center of it all sat Artaxerxes III, a ruthless and jaunty monarch who had succeeded in seizing his throne by disposing most of his kin. Only the strongest and cruel were respected by him. I recognized in him, so I watched him, I studied him. That's how I found out about his thoughts, what things scared him or who he trusted. I've made myself the perfect servant, a very efficient, discreet, and very faithful one. Or so he thought. Strategic was the king's trust in eunuchs. He knew the great Persian families were nests of vipers, and each a potential rival. We eunuchs had no siblings, only the court, no offspring to propel us forward, and in theory our loyalty was total, because our power was 100% tied to the king. He regarded me as a tool, and I let him. I climbed the ladder and eventually was his confidential minister, his chiliarch, his vizier, the second most powerful man of the empire, and all the while the ghost of the boy they tried to break was watching, waiting for its revenge as it would in time. The gilded cage was a great comfort there, but I didn't mean to die there. I was going to burn it to the ground. To have the title of master over the king's people, one must first be the king's most essential servant. The empire, under Artaxerxes III, was being stitched back together brutally all over again. And I, Bagoas, was the needle. What I had was the map on which the king's aims were drawn. The first big test was Egypt. The land of the pharaohs had been in open revolt for decades, a perennial issue in the empire's way. Artaxerxes required a triumph, a hard and definitive one. As the king assembled his troops, I labored in the shadows with the brilliant Greek mercenary general, mentor of Rhodes. He was the blade. I was the hand with which he aimed it. I got it. the machineries of men, the subtle algebra of fear, how ambition works in the world. We marched on Egypt in 343 B.C. This wasn't just a war of the troops, it was a war of brains. I did not lead from the front. My battlefield was the web of spies and informants I had cultivated. I financed factions in the Egyptian court, bribed commanders, and disseminated dissent. Mentor's military genius and my web of intrigue allowed Egypt to see its defenses fail. Pharaoh Nectanebo Roman II escaped, and the ancient kingdom reverted to its rightful status as a Persian province. The victory was total. All the temples were pillaged, and the spoils were staggering. My true prize, however, was power. Artaxerxes was pleased. He had known full well what part I had played in the victory, and gave me reward as the supreme commander of the eastern satrapies, a super satrap that had unprecedented authority. I was his vizier, someone who was his most trusted representative. The Greek historian Diodorus named me a eunuch in physical fact, but a militant rogue in disposition. He wasn't wrong. The king trusted me. That had been his fatal slip-up. He witnessed my efficiency and my loyalty, and he thought I was all for him. He saw the perfect instrument. He'd never gazed into my eyes and seen the ghost of a butchered boy, a ghost that spent decades honing its hatred like a razor's edge. He thought he had mastered me. What had happened was he had just passed me the keys to his kingdom, and the keys to his tomb along with them. It was beyond me being the favorite of the king. I was the king's master. The year is 338 B.C. I have long been the shadow behind the throne, the architect of the king's resurgent empire. His victories are my designs, but power is actually a joke. The more you have, the more fear one gets of losing it. The arrogance caused Artaxerxes' work process to slacken, and I found myself listening to whispers. The king's sons viewed me as an obstacle. The Persian nobles, who had always despised the authority of a eunuch, found me an insult. Then I heard the most dangerous whisper of all, that the king himself was growing suspicious of me, that for too long my shadow had grown. I knew him. My mind had been part of shaping it. I realized a tool, once untrusted, is no longer trusted. I thought I'd hit first. My weapon wasn't a sword. It was too loud, too crude. My strategy was silent and quiet. Poison. It's the weapon of the man who can draw near enough to his king to serve him a drink. Sources such as Diodorus say I did it, but the details are lost to history. There was no grand struggle. I thought just a quiet death for this man of such savage vitality. A cuneiform tablet may say he died of natural causes, but history is written by the victors. And at that point I was the victor, but by killing the king one step took place. I was asking for my order, because a headless empire is chaos. I had to rid my board of any son of Artaxerxes, which might become a rallying point for my enemies. All the viable threats vanished, all but one, and that was the youngest son Arses. That was a boy. He was weak, pliable, and perfect. The crown I placed on his trembling head. He became Artaxerxes Roman IV. However, inside the court, everyone knew the truth. They gaped at the boy on the throne and saw a puppet. Then they gaped at me, standing in shadows beside him, and then at the puppeteer. I had ruled Persia for 2 years. The castrated slave boy I was had made the most powerful man in the world. It was dizzying height, but the air at the top is thin, and my greatest triumph had only sowed the seeds of my own doom. Being a kingmaker means facing a target behind your back. I ruled for 2 years, from 338 to 336 B.C., and I ruled through my puppet King Arses for another 2 years. But puppets, it appears, grow a mind as well. Arses started heeding the courtiers who said that he was a descendant of Cyrus the Great, who was not to be ruled by a mutilated servant. He began to resist me, and some reports suggest he even designed to use my favorite weapon, poison, against me. This was a pathetic endeavor, and ultimately it would be the last error he made. In 336 B.C. I corrected my error. The throne was empty once more. This time I needed a different kind of king. My selection landed on a distant cousin of the royal line, a satrap from Armenia called Artaxerxes, who would take the name Darius III. The idea was, his gratitude and his distance from the court's major schemes would render him bearable. I took him to the capital and gave him the crown of the world. This was my huge error of judgment. Darius was no Arses. He was clever, ambitious, and never going to be an easy pawn for anyone. He took the crown from my hand and then cemented his power unexpectedly soon. He knew so well that as long as I lived he would not really be the rightful holder of the throne. The whispers back in the palace began, but they spoke to me. I was being pushed apart by Darius, bit by bit cutting down on the threads of my network. I was too late, and I understood that he was targeting me. He didn't give himself a dramatic, theatrical confrontation, according to the histories. He didn't need one. He'd been warned that I might attempt to poison him, and turned it. One of Darius III's first things as an undisputed king was to put me to death. The master poisoner made to pay for the creation of the king. A fitting, terrible irony. My death in 336 BC left the empire in the hands of a brave, but ill-equipped ruler. I had left Persia exposed, just as a storm was brewing in the west. That very same year, the Macedonian king Philip Roman II had dispatched an army into Asia Minor. Philip was soon to be dead, but his son, a boy named Alexander, would inherit his father's army with his plans and ambitions, and the shattered empire I had abandoned. But my narrative, though, was not over. I wasn't finished yet with kings in my name. My first life ended in agony, but a name, such as Bagoas, so inextricably tied to power and betrayal, doesn't vanish. History, apparently, has poetry. The fall of Persia demanded to have my name finally, not as an assassin, but as a prize. There was a new vessel with my story's thread, another Bagoas, a boy whose fate, too, had to be wrapped up in kings and empires. This second life started in beauty and ruin, as did the first. I was born to a noble Persian family, but slavers seized me and the knife caught me. I was made a eunuch, gifted in the arts that spellbinding powerful men. Dance, music, and the silent pledge laid out in a glance. The Romans would later say I was a boy of exceptional appearance, in the very flower of boyhood. I became a eunuch when my beauty sold my ticket to the palace of the very king the previous one had crowned, Darius III. I knew that he could find me right there for his pleasure. Darius was a king in distress, at least, and I met him there. His was sincere yet affectionate, the compassion of a tired man in a world that was turning dark at unprecedented speed. The darkness had a name. Alexander, the young Macedonian king, arrived in Asia in 334 BC, and things began to unravel. Defeat at the Granicus River, the loss of Asia Minor. Darius led his army to face the invader at Issus in 333 BC, and when that battle turned, Darius withdrew, abandoning his camp, family, and me. The climactic battle occurred in 331 BC at Gaugamela. Darius fled again, riding east into the ruins of his empire. No recovery this time. The last name would have been Nabarzanes, whose own commanders had turned on him. Nabarzanes is one. Nabarzanes, king-murderer, urgently needed a way to placate the victor. So he chose me. I was shown to Alexander like a spoil of war, the lovely eunuch who was favored by the defeated king. Before this lion of Macedon I stood. He was nothing like Darius. Where Darius had grown weary, Alexander was electric. The historian Curtius wrote that soon after Alexander learned of Darius's love for me, he would begin to learn it himself. He accepted the gift. He also had mercy at my plea, although it is not common for him to do so, the traitor Nabarzanes, however. That was when my fate went from a dynasty destined to die to a newly resilient power in a better world. I had been the conqueror's prize. Life with Alexander was like living in the eye of a hurricane. I had been the favorite of a Persian king. Now I was the beloved, the Irmenos, of a man who was starting to see himself as a god. His Macedonian soldiers viewed me with suspicion. To them, I was a symbol of the decadent East they had conquered. Alexander's closest friend, Hephaestion, tolerated me, but the rivalry between us for the king's affection was a silent, simmering tension. But Alexander wasn't like his men. He was fascinated by Persian culture, a Persophile who saw beauty where his soldiers saw weakness. I became his guide to the world he now ruled. I was the bridge between his Greek past and his Persian future. He saw in me the living symbol of the blended empire he hoped to create. My power was in intimacy, a shared laugh in his tent, a melody on the flute after a battle, a quiet understanding. The most public display of our bond came in Carmania, after the army's horrific march through the Gedrosian desert. To restore morale, Alexander held a week of wild festivals. A dance competition was held, and I won. As the victor, I made my way through the roaring crowd, still in my dancer's garland, and sat beside the king. The Macedonian soldiers, drunk and rowdy, began to chant, demanding that their king kiss the winner. Alexander, ever the showman, grinned, threw his arms around me, and kissed me right there, in front of his entire army. The crowd roared. It was more than a kiss, it was a statement. He would love who he chose, and his world would blend Greek and Persian customs as he saw fit. But even in his favor the court was dangerous. A powerful satrap named Artaxerxes, who claimed descent from Cyrus the Great, sneered that it wasn't Persian custom to honor men who served as women. He called me a whore. The elder Bagoas would have used poison. I used a whisper in the king's ear, accusing Artaxerxes of plundering the tomb of Cyrus. Artaxerxes was arrested and executed. As they led him to his death, he lamented, "I had heard that women were once rulers in Asia, but this really is something new, a eunuch a king. He was wrong. I wasn't a king. I was the king's beloved, a shadow of influence that could still direct life and death. I was with Alexander until the end. I was there in Babylon when the fever took him, when the man who conquered the world was conquered by a sickness no one could see. He was just 32 years old. After his death, I vanish from the historical record. Perhaps I accompanied his body to Egypt. We'll never know. The story of Bagoas, the younger, ends where Alexander's legend begins. But the story of Bagoas, the unbroken chronicle of the name, is the story of Persia's fall. My first self, the elder, was the architect of the decay. Driven by vengeance, I hollowed out the dynasty from the inside. I murdered a strong king and replaced him with fatally flawed successors, destabilizing the empire just when it needed strength most. I was the sickness in the wood, rotting the great Persian tree so it was ready to fall at the first swing of an axe. Alexander was that axe, but the tree was already dying. My second self, the younger, was the witness to the final collapse. I was the beloved of the last Achaemenid king, and then I became the beloved of his conqueror, the transfer of an empire sealed with a kiss. The historians focus on the great battles and the larger than life figure of Alexander, but they forget the quiet moments, the whispered words, the cup of wine passed from one hand to another. They forget the power wielded by those thought to have none. They forget that before the conqueror could triumph, the Kingmaker first had to fail. I am Bagoas, I was a footnote, I was a favorite, and I was the shadow that brought the night. If you love digging into the stories that history forgot, make sure you subscribe and ring the bell for more chronicles from the ancient world's most fascinating voices. Drop a comment below and tell us which historical figure's secret autobiography you want to hear next.